Hereby, I open the academic ceremony in which Ewa Mahr will defend the academic thesis, EULEX in the eyes of locals, between legitimacy and contestation. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and your conclusions of your thesis?
Thank you. Dear Prorector, dear members of Corona, droga rodzino, dear friends and colleagues, dear viewers, thank you for participating in the defense of my PhD dissertation entitled EULEX in the Eyes of Locals, Between Legitimacy and Contestation. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Most of us know the famous song Imagine by John Lennon. Unfortunately, over 50 years after Lennon wrote this song, the world today is still very far away from this dream. In 2021, there were armed conflicts in at least 46 countries around the world, resulting in enormous suffering and around 150,000 deaths. And we don't have yet data for 2022, but of course we have one more major conflict in Ukraine, Russian aggression. And this is only the tip of the iceberg, as lower intensity conflicts take away the chance for normal, happy lives from millions of people. This does not mean, however, that the international community has not been trying to change the situation. On the contrary, for instance, here we see all the missions of the European Union currently deployed around the world. And the EU is, of course, not the only peace-building organization, but there are others. The most important one, it's, of course, United Nations, with 90,000 peace builders around the world, but there are several others, for instance, the African Union, NATO, and OSCE. Indeed, since the end of the Cold War, there has been a growing number of international peace-building missions. However, these missions often do not succeed or only succeed partly. We could see the most glaring example of such failure in Afghanistan, where 20 years of peace-building efforts were reversed practically overnight. So, both peacekeeping practitioners and academics have been trying to understand the reasons behind such mixed results. And this research looks at one such very important factor influencing the international peacebuilding missions: local actors and their organizations. So, why local actors, local people? Because local people are the ones who suffer in each conflict. They are the ones who fight or who decide to give peace a chance. Their support, or at least acceptance, is crucial for any peace-building mission, so they should be at the center of attention of both academics and peace builders. But surprisingly, for a long time, this has not been the case. We do not know yet enough about what is important for the local people, what they want, and what is their role in international peace building. So this is the reason behind this research, to learn more. My research is about a place where local people did not behave in a way that the international peace builders had expected. So let me present you EULEX, European Rule of Law Mission in Kosovo. EULEX should have been a success story. When it deployed in 2008, Kosovars were, and still are, a very pro-European society. Kosovo hopes to join the EU, but still has serious problems with rule of law. And Kosovars hoped that EU and EULEX would help them with these problems. EULEX was also grudgingly accepted by Serbia, which was important for the Serbian minority in Kosovo. So, however, what happened in reality was that the mission was not welcomed as warmly as expected. On the contrary, the local perceptions of EULEX turned out to be, at least partly, surprisingly negative. So, what happened and why did it happen? This is the core of the puzzle addressed by my research, which I formulated as: how can we explain the unexpectedly strong negative local perceptions of EULEX, including the high level of contestation against that? So let us take a closer look at Kosovo and Kosovars. Kosovo is a young country which declared independence in 2008. This independence is recognized by 117 countries, but not by Serbia, which regards it as its province, and also not by 5 EU member states. And the most important experience influencing the locals is the violent conflict between Yugoslav army and Kosovo-Albanian militias in 1998-99. The conflict ended after NATO carried out a bombing campaign of Serbia, and Kosovo was then administered by UN until its independence. NATO, through its mission KFOR, provided security and still does until today. The conflict also created the deep divide between majority ethnic Albanians, around 90% of the population, and ethnic Serbs living in Kosovo, around 5%. Particularly Serbs in the north isolated themselves from Albanians and rebuilt strong relations with Serbia. So, EULEX was deployed in such a divided country to monitor, mentor, and advise. It focused on 3 areas: Kosovo's judiciary, customs, and police, and it also had some executive functions, mostly to fight high-level corruption and war crimes. What is important to know is that EU initially expected EULEX to be deployed under a new UN Security Council resolution in support of Kosovo's independence. However, such resolution was blocked in Security Council, and it also became clear that 5 EU member states would not recognize Kosovo's independence. So the EU rushed to decide on deploying the mission just days before the declaration of independence in order to avoid having to tackle this problem. And the solution was to deploy EULEX as a status-neutral technical mission. What that means is that EULEX does not have a position on if Kosovo is an independent country or a province of Serbia. And in my research, I focused on the first couple of years of EULEX's deployment from 2008 till mid-June 2012, as afterwards the mission was reorganized and downsized. Okay, so to understand the reasons behind negative perceptions of EULEX, I ask 3 questions related to my puzzle, and I answer each of them in a separate study. To collect the information for the studies, I interviewed 47 people, mostly local Kosovars, and I also used written documents, mostly local press articles, and the press statements of the government. So, in the first study, I looked at the big picture, so the whole range of perceptions of EULEX from positive to negative. I focus on security tasks of EULEX, but I also look in parallel at security tasks of NATO mission KFOR. Although these security tasks were similar for both missions, the local perceptions of the 2 missions were not. And in this study, I analyze what caused these differences. In the second study, I zoom in on a specific type of negative local perceptions, so I look at why Kosovars contested EULEX. And finally, in the third study, I look at the role of the local people in creating local perceptions of EULEX, and in particular at the role of the Kosovo government. This government, like every other democratic government, needed legitimacy in order to stay in power. And one way of improving this legitimacy was talking to the local people about EULEX and trying to shape their perceptions of how they saw both EULEX and the government. So let us have a look at the studies more in detail. So in the first study, I look at how local people saw the power of EULEX and KFOR. Power has 3 facets. Firstly, a mission can be powerful if local people fear coercion from it, and this is why they comply with what the mission wants. Second possibility is that the local people believe that complying with the mission will bring them financial rewards. And finally, the third possibility is that the mission can be powerful because local people see it as legitimate. So this is why they comply. And what I uncovered in this study is that the local people in general did not see EULEX as powerful. Both Albanians and Serbs saw the mission as too weak and biased to employ coercion, especially the coercion against the other ethnic groups, which they saw as an existential threat. Surprisingly, financial rewards did not play a role in shaping the perception of EULEX, although the EU had been a generous donor to Kosovo for many years. And as concerns legitimacy, again, EULEX lacked it both among Albanians and Serbs, and the main reason was the status neutrality of the mission. Albanians had instead expected a mission in support of Kosovo's independence, and Serbs did not believe in EULEX's neutrality, and they saw the mission instead as working together with Albanians to regain access and control of the north. In the second study, I zoom in at contestation against EULEX. Contestation is a term describing activities which are public and carried out to demand a change in mission's mandate or operations. Contestation can be collective, for instance, protests and demonstrations, or it can take the form of public criticism, for example, public statements and press articles. For EULEX, I looked at two possible reasons for contestation. So first possibility is that the local people saw EULEX as violating sovereignty, either of Kosovo or of Serbia. And the second is that they saw EULEX as not efficient in its work. And indeed, what I found is that both reasons triggered contestation, but contestation of a different kind. For violations of sovereignty, be it Kosovo's or Serbia's, the locals mostly reacted with protests, blockades, marches, and other forms of collective contestation, sometimes violent. Such protests took place both among Albanians and Serbs mostly in the north. And EULEX's problems with effectiveness were mostly problematic for Albanians, and they mainly reacted with public criticism. In the third study, I focus on how the government communicated to the local people about EULEX in order to increase or defend its own legitimacy. I zoom in here on one case, the investigations by EULEX of Transport Minister on corruption studies. So in general, the government tried to align these messages with the values of Kosovars, and fight against corruption, high-level corruption, was very important for the Kosovars. So when EULEX conducted its searches, it was very difficult for the government to criticize it directly, and what they tried to do instead was to portray EULEX's activities as an excessive attack on the democratic institutions. But this strategy did not succeed, as it was not in line with the values and what was important for the society, so the fight against high-level corruption. But in other cases that I analyzed in the study, the government was more successful in aligning itself with the public opinion. So if the public opinion was already critical against EULEX, the government's criticism further strengthened the sentiment to its own benefit. So to sum it up, how can we explain the negative local perceptions of EULEX, including contestation against that? So three factors are important here. Firstly, the locals saw EULEX as not powerful, lacking both coercive power and legitimacy. Secondly, locals contested the mission because they saw it as violating Kosovo's or Serbia's sovereignty and as lacking effectiveness. And finally, the Kosovar government also played a role here because it attempted to influence the local perceptions by criticizing EULEX when doing it helped its own legitimacy. So, what this research has shown us more broadly is that local people do matter in international peacekeeping activities because they can influence them both in a negative and positive way. So, who the locals are, what they think, what they want, and what is legitimate for them is important to understand. Otherwise, the missions risk being unsuccessful. And what is particularly important to understand is what makes the local people contest the missions, because contestation is a clear and visible sign of discontent with the mission's policies. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. The opposition will now be opened by Professor Thomas Conzelmann, who is Professor of International Relations at our Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, Maastricht University.
Thank you. Dear candidate, congratulations on a very nice, very empirically rich, very dense PhD thesis that you have written. I think you convinced us all about the importance of your topic, about the role of peace building in giving peace a chance, as you called it today, and also about the very important role then of local perceptions for the success of these missions. The dangers of bias, of violation of sovereignty, also the collaboration with local governments. I think these were all very interesting and empirically detailed and rich insights. My question to you has to do really with the success of these missions. In your thesis, you start off by saying that the success of missions really crucially depends on the perceptions of the local populations, and in the conclusion you also say that a positive perception of the mission is a necessary condition for the success of a mission. I would ask you to go a little bit deeper than this. So one question would be, and I've been reminded not to ask many questions in one, but one question would be, how would you define success, actually? So can you define success a little bit more for us? You could probably say keeping everyone happy on the ground is not something that a peace-building mission should necessarily do, but indeed it should also sometimes be neutral and work against the interests of some parts of the population at least. So what is success for you in the end? And linked to that, what is the relevance of local positive perceptions then for the success of the mission? And for which elements of success. So if you say it's a necessary condition for success, it's obviously not a sufficient condition of success, and there will be other conditions that are important. What are these other conditions that make for the success of a mission? And how do they interrelate then with these local perceptions? That would be my interest that I would like to ask to you. Thank you.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your nice words and for your questions, all related to success. So what would be success for me, how I would define success, and also as the local acceptance is a necessary condition for success, but what would be the other elements of success? And let me first start maybe that yes, indeed, I am very convinced that local acceptance of the mission is the necessary condition for the success. However, I would say I do not focus on success in the thesis. So the answer to the question, what is success and what are other elements necessary besides local perceptions, my research does not answer this question. However, I can give you some of my thoughts on the topic based on what I have seen in relation to Kosovo. So, well, this is a very good question, what is success? Because I think success will be something different for decision makers in Brussels, for personnel of the mission on the ground, for and even if we look at the local people, how they would define success, it will be a totally different answer for the government, for the opposition, for, let's say, in case of Kosovo, might be a different answer for Albanians and Serbs. And within, for example, Serb community, it would be a different story for Serbs in the north and Serbs in the rest of the country. So I think that it's a very difficult question, very difficult to find a definite answer on what is success. So I would say to relate it to the local perceptions, what factors I could see as contributing to success would be, I think first of all, would be that the mission is already designed, the mandate replies to the needs on the ground. That would be the first element of the success. And here, for example, I already see the problems with EULEX, because if you, for example, see the size of the police component, I would say that that did not reply to the needs on the ground. It was rather externally decided in Brussels. So here there's already space for improvement. Also, in terms of deciding on priorities in general, I think that, well, they have to be aligned with the what local actors expect. I wouldn't say it should be just making them happy. As you said, it's not a question, because then we, for example, in Kosovo, we would never investigate any war crimes, because the Kosovo actors are just not interested. But still, for example, to come back to this police, I would say that the needs objectively, but also in the eyes of the local actors in judiciary, were much higher than in other fields. And the importance that the mission, in fact, put on the sector as compared to what was advertised as the importance, but let's say the number of judges, the number of prosecutors, the actual aid given to judiciary sector, I would think that was not a recipe for success, because it did not address the real needs on the ground. And of course, if we think about success, there are conditions which are relevant to the country of deployment, and the conditions relevant to the mission itself, how it's structured. So, I would say that the two should be aligned. What else I can think about would be a very simple suggestion. How mission can be more successful is to know the place where it's deployed. And even there, I would say with EULEX, it was an issue, because we could see very simple mistakes that EULEX made just because of not realizing the sensitivities on the ground. So I don't know if it was because of mandate from Brussels or because it was just of lack of knowledge of people. But one example would be here, the police protocol, which was a very clear example how the mission should not have behaved. So the police protocol with Serbia was something that EULEX treated as a technical protocol, which has its business as usual. It was signed with Serbia, Montenegro, well, all the members. So no big cooperation with the government, no external communication. And then the mission woke up to big protests on the streets because of lack of knowledge that it's sensitive. Everything with Serbia is sensitive. So I would say that this basic knowledge about the country, you cannot substitute it with anything else. And I think it's one of the major components of the success. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Keukelere, Professor Stefan Keukelere, Professor of European Foreign Policy, Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Leuven.
So thank you for the thesis. Thank you for inviting me here to be part of the doctoral committee. I read your thesis with much interest because I got a lot of flashbacks, because I did research on the EULEX mission in the early 2008, so in the very first months, even before it formally started, including interviews with Albin Kurti in very different positions at the time. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot about, although obviously the thesis is also about the first period of the EULEX mission, also about continuity of the problems, of the challenges of the first couple of months, first year, and then afterwards, and that's contestation, already from the start. The interaction between the legitimacy of the EU, of the EULEX mission, and the government, and the political leaders, and judicial leaders. And I think here your thesis is really interesting, because you show this interaction where indeed the Kosovar government, depending on what it thinks it should say in terms of the public, is positive or negative, and there, particularly your part on how they tackle corruption is really interesting. And then obviously how you have to look at the topic through the eyes of the locals. And my question is particularly focused on that. You say in your conclusion, but also in other chapters, that you uncover a high heterogeneity of the local population, that indeed it's not a monolithical group. You say that indeed it's not just the ethnic division, but you have differences within the two ethnic groups. But then very briefly you indicate there are also other things to play, geographic location, political views, demographic characteristic relation. But I don't learn that much about what then is this heterogeneity. Can you explain a little bit more what is this heterogeneity? Are there some patterns that you can find? Were there evolution in these patterns? Because that would be interesting, not only for me, but also for perhaps other scholars who would like to further focus on the eyes of the local to already know a little bit more what patterns do exist within this group of locals. So that's my first question. I hope later on there's time for a second question.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for nice words and for your questions. So if I understand well, it relates to heterogeneity of the local actors besides the division into two ethnic groups. So you would like to know a little bit more about how it actually plays out in Kosovo. So yes, indeed. So as you mentioned, the most important division that I discovered was between the two ethnic groups, but it does not mean that inside Albanians, all the Albanians were the same or all the Serbs were the same, on the contrary. So maybe to start with the Serbs, I would say the most important division was between the Serbs who lived in the north and the Serbs who lived in the rest of the country. Well, it's because of very different conditions that they lived in, but also because of different political leaders they had. So the conditions first, well, Serbs in the north, at the time of this research, they hardly felt that they were part of Kosovo. They were at the border with Serbia, they had direct communication or transportation to Serbia, they had Serbian money, they had Serbian schools, Serbian healthcare, so they cut all the links from the rest of Kosovo. So obviously, they had different lives than those Serbs who lived in so-called enclaves at the time. I think we don't use this name anymore, but at the time it was very popular. So small villages surrounded by Albanians. And it gives you also a different feeling of security also, and a different need to either try to live with the situation that Kosovo has declared independence and trying to somehow find a way to live with your neighbors, or not, like in the north. In the north, they had no intention whatsoever. And these living conditions very much influenced the way how the Serbs felt and also behaved, because also in terms of contestation, in terms of fighting this Albanian influence, there was a difference. The Serbs living in an enclave did not even have very much of a power to do anything about Kosovo being independent. So they might not like the situation, but they didn't fight it in any way, while the Serbs in the north had barricades. They attacked sometimes EULEX, and so they burned the gates at the border in the very beginning when the Declaration of Independence took place. So that would be one very important factor in how I would divide them. And the second important factor also for the Serbs would be the leadership, because the leadership in the north was much more radical than the leadership for the rest of the Serbs, so particularly the leaders in the Gračanica, which was the center for the other Serbs, or Štrbce. So they were in opposition to the government in Belgrade. So they tried to be very radical to make themselves different. So it was not in their interest to find a way to live with EULEX, because this is what the Serbian government was telling them to do, at least publicly. And that also resulted in more protests, more barricades, more active and sometimes violent contestation, which did not exist in the other parts. Because, yes, there the local leaders were more resigned to the fate, like we have to accommodate the situation. Also, at some point, those Serbian leaders who were important for the rest of the Serbian community, not in the north, they were in the government of Kosovo. And not those from Lista Srpska, which right now afterwards they also were, but it's a totally different political situation also. So that would be the most important factors for the Serbs. And for the Albanians, I would say, well, there was one group in particular which was different that I also analyzed in my research, which was Vetevendosje, which was at the time rather radical. So you saw one of the pictures in my presentation of the cars of EULEX which were destroyed. That was Vetevendosje in Pristina, destroying 26 cars of EULEX at the parking as a violent demonstration. So this particular social movement at the time and a political party in government right now with Albin Kurti, they were different than the other Albanians. I would say that this is the biggest division among Albanians because they were also in general against any kind of executive functions of the international community. So they had been protesting against UNMIK already. They wanted at the time the international organizations to just leave Kosovo and let them be in peace without any external influences. It evolved, and now it's a bit different, but at the time it was like that. So yes, I think that would be the main division.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Hilke Dijkstra, Associate Professor in International Relations at our Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, Maastricht University.
Dear candidates, let me also start by congratulating you on this magnificent book, which really displays in-depth knowledge of both the country Kosovo and the case of EULEX. Let me also congratulate you already with the fantastic presentation today. I think you did very well in bringing the 3 articles of this book together in terms of keynote conclusions. I'm also here with Professor Kuikeleijer, that it reminds me back of those good old days, those times where we could travel to Kosovo and interview people there on the ground. But perhaps more importantly, it brings me back to the time that we were still working together in the EU CIVCA project, the Horizon project, a while ago, together with your supervisors. Now, in terms of my question, I would want to know a little bit about the learning capacity of the EU. So you've studied really the first 4 years of EULEX. And the way you've gone into this book is saying, well, the EU is a rich organization, it's well equipped, it had been before it launched EULEX there for 2 years doing all sorts of conflict assessments. And yet it was met with that tremendous amount of local contestation. Now, we're now 10 years further than your study period. Has the EU really done something to adjust its own conduct? Has it really improved its mission? Or if I would go now back to Kosovo today, would I still see the same degree of contestation and the same conduct of the EU as it had 10 years ago?
Esteemed opponent, thank you very much for nice words and the question. I also miss going back to Kosovo to interview people. So your question, if I understood well, relates to learning capacity of EU in terms of EULEX in Kosovo. So would you be met with the same kind of contestation today as you would have been in 2010, 11? The quick answer is no, because the mission is not seen as relevant at all. But just to take one step backwards, so I would say that yes, the EU learned, and I hope that those lessons will also be used for some other missions. However, my feeling is that for this particular mission, it was too little too late. So obviously, my research does not focus on learning capacity, but I have been talking with the local people about that. So basically, what I presented in my dissertation, all the negative local perceptions, especially lack of effectiveness. At the moment of 2012, when I finished my research, and actually even more in 2013, when on top of all the negative perceptions, there came the accusations of corruption. And that to be honest, killed this mission. So it never recovered from that. Although I have to say that the EU tried in terms of at least communication and in terms of having more contacts, outreach to the local population. EU tried to do more, but it was just not enough anymore to counter all those negative perceptions. So path dependency here was very strong, and for EULEX was not possible anymore to recover. And of course, gradually the mission was downsizing from almost 3,000 in the beginning. Now it's just a couple of hundreds, and it does not have executive functions anymore since 2018. So they do have some tasks. They still help with, for example, the prison system, but they are not met with any kind of contestations because they are not visible anymore, and the local actors don't really care what they do. Already in 2012, there were strong calls that mission should just disband and there should be a new mission doing something maybe similar, but that it was already, the image was too destroyed to rebound from that. In 2015, when I went there, it was even stronger. So there were think tanks reports called EULEX must go. So it just shows the level of negative sentiments. So just to sum up, so yes, EU learned from this experience, tried to improve things, but it was not enough. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you. Yes, that answered my question.
Thank you so much. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Martin Fink. It will be continued online. And Professor Martin Fink is a professor of political sociology, also at our Faculty of Social Sciences, but as you can see, he's at the moment in Florence, where he holds a chair in citizenship studies at the European University Institute.
Thank you, dear candidate, dear Eva. It's really a pleasure to be here today at your PhD defense. I'm sorry I cannot be there in person, but thanks to the technique, I can still join. Well, I had the privilege of welcoming you at the start of your PhD journey, which was already some years ago as part of our part-time PhD program based at Maastricht University's Brussels campus. And it's really a delight to see you here today defending your thesis, and congratulations to your persistence and your stamina for seeing this work through to the end, combining your other work and family. It's also a real pleasure to read your work. I'm not a specialist on international peace building activities, so I learned a lot from reading your work, and it's very well researched and well written. Now, the question that I wanted to raise firstly is one on research ethics and your positionality as a researcher while doing the field research. So you write maybe 2 or 3 sentences on this in your dissertation in the methods part, and I wanted to discuss that a bit further with you. So did you face any concerns about research ethics during your field work? And here I'm not talking about data protection and securing anonymity of the sources that you use, but rather about your positionality, right? And with positionality, I mean that you, of course, are a researcher at Maastricht University, but you are also an EU public official on leave during the time of your study, if I am correctly, but you've mentioned in your dissertation also that you have drawn on your previous professional work with Kosovo while doing your research in Kosovo. And of course, you are not a Kosovar yourself, so there are all kinds of positionality questions that come into play when you do your field work, and how much did these obstruct or potentially bias maybe your work, your way of looking at the local context in Kosovo, but also how people perceived you as an outsider, and to what extent can you rely on the kind of answers that you received. So yeah, please help me understand a little bit better your positionality in your study, and to what extent did this potentially influence some of the outcomes that you report on. Thank you.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for nice words. And a question related to the research ethics, both because of my professional background, but also because of, yes, working with Kosovars, not being a Kosovar myself. So this is a question that, of course, I think every researcher has to ask themselves about that and to make efforts to be, well, to follow the research guidelines and ethics in entirety of their work. And I have to say this is a question that, or the burden of feeling the moral obligation to really behave in an ethical way that you do feel during the field work, especially. When you talk to the people, so I did definitely feel that, like feeling the moral obligation that I cannot in any way do anything with this data, which was, well, people trusted me with that stories. And I also managed to reach, for example, my local research assistant brought me to his own family so that I could hear the stories of his aunt and the family about the conflict between Albanians and Serbs. And this is a situation of a lot of trust given to me. And this is a situation which makes you really feel like, okay, I have to take utmost care that I use this data in a very professional way without abusing this trust in any way. So this is definitely something which was at the back of my mind the whole time when I did the field work and when I analyzed the interviews and when I thought about how to use them in the dissertation. So I think, yes, very, very important question. Now, of course, there's another element that you already mentioned, is that I did not come to this topic, I did not start the topic from zero, but I had professional contacts. I had worked with Kosovo, and in the European Parliament, of course, it's an EU institution, so of course, it's also in a way part of the EU family, the same as EULEX. So there again, one needs to be very careful not to have any kind of biased opinions about EULEX. So basically not to see the problems if they exist, as of course it's also in the interest of the EU as such and European Parliament that EU missions succeed. I would not say it was a problem in this case, because I think it was more of an advantage, because as I had already worked like both with Kosovars and both with Serbian Kosovars and Albanian Kosovars, I knew them. I knew more what questions to ask. I knew whom to contact to have good sources of information. So, and also I have spent some time thinking about my own opinions about that and my personal possible bias, but I think that I try to avoid it, and I think I'm quite happy. I'm quite happy with the result. So the way of seeing both sides, I believe it was rather neutral. So just to round it up, yes, I saw the importance of not being biased here, but I believe I succeeded with all the biased information, biased view of ourselves that we all have, also researchers.
Thank you.
You have been very concise, so we have time for a second round. And the second round will now be started off by Professor Kerkelere.
So I'm pleased I can have the second question. And it's partially related to the previous question. I think the first time I really saw the difference between formal interviews and the informal talks was in Kosovo in 2008 and 2009. And the formal interviews I had led to some interesting information, but I learned much more through the informal interactions. And it's clear that this was also the case with you, because you refer to all these bottles of Kosovo wine that you were drinking overnight. And so I have a dual question here. Did you also see this difference in what you learned in your formal interviews and what you could use, and what you learned through these informal contexts? So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is then, how did you deal with that? Because my problem was that I often had the impression that what I was writing was wrong, or better, was incomplete. So our academic, or the academic behavior we learned that we have to follow leads, in my view, to bad academic research, because we have to neglect part of what we learn. So that's my question. I have a third question, but that's not a serious one. Did you drink as much Kosovo wine as Serbian wine in order to balance? But that's for the reception. So the second question is the most important one.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your questions. So, well, two questions, one about wine and now one about...
the wine is for later.
Yes. Yeah. So the difference that I saw between formal interviews and informal talks, as the formal interviews could give incomplete picture. So I would say I had a lot of information that I had gained from informal talks before I started this research. That was from my previous time, and we worked with people who work in think tanks in Kosovo, for example. So we had those meetings, both formal and informal, but a lot of informal ones, which helped me to actually also structure my puzzle. It gave me the background. But of course, this is information that has to be verified. So I could not just write it down in the dissertation. So how I dealt with that? Well, some of the people that I had these informal talks with, then I interviewed formally. So and I think that gave me the benefit that they already knew me. They trusted me, I hope. So I could receive more or less the same information in the formal interview than I had got in the internal one, because I also knew what questions to ask to verify this informal information. So that was one valuable point. And the second valuable point is that I think I got a lot of information from the formal interviews because people did not see me as threatening, or in any way like, okay, that was some time ago. You looked also maybe quite young, PhD student. I like talking to the people, so I think they had the impression that yes, I was genuinely interested in the answers, and I could also follow up with detailed questions because of this informal knowledge that I had of the context. So I was, in general, happy with the quality of the formal information that I received during the interviews. And if it was not enough, then I had another interview with one or two other people to really always verify through formal talks what I already knew was there, but maybe initially people didn't want to tell me formally. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Hilke Dijkstra.
I want to go from Kosovo 2008-2012 to Kosovo today. And I want to pick your brain as a real Kosovo expert to learn a bit more about current events. Now, as you know, last month there has been an important agreement signed by Prime Minister Albin Kurti and the President of Serbia, Vučić, on the normalization of relationships between Kosovo and Serbia, really held as a landmark agreement that potentially now finally allows both countries to move on more than 15 years after the unilateral declaration of independence by Kosovo. Now, this agreement was obviously originally tabled by France and Germany, by their lead diplomatic representatives of the president and the Bundeskanzler. But the EU, I think, played a real important role here as well. And I think it really comes on top of all the work that Special Representative Lajčák has been doing in the dialogue over the last 2 years in terms of crisis management, but now finally moving forward. So my question really is, what do you make of this latest deal. Do you think this is really a step forward for both countries? And should we perhaps, reassess the EU policy in a bit more positive light as a result of this than on the basis of the EULEX experience that you've described in your PhD?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your question about the latest developments and agreement between Kosovo and Serbia, or Belgrade and Pristina. Obviously, this does not relate directly to the dissertation, but I try to follow the recent developments. So, of course, I have my opinion about it. If it's a correct opinion, if it will come out to be true, we'll see. But I would say, I think the landmark agreement was 2015, and it was not implemented. So a lot of things which were decided right now were kind of repetition. Now we will do what we promised in 2015. And there was a lot of enthusiasm at the time that now it's really going to, the situation between the two countries would improve. So, and it did not happen. It happened to some point, but not to the extent that the EU hoped. So I'm a bit cautious about that. I'm optimistic, but still the deal has to be implemented, and so far we have seen with all the previous times that the understanding of the deal after signing the deal was different on two sides. So they still have to now agree on what they decided on. And this is the first obstacle. And as I said, I'm in general an optimist by nature, but we've seen in the past that in this particular context, sometimes, yes, optimism is premature. Now, I would say this is definitely the biggest commitment on the side of this Kosovo Prime Minister. So the other agreements were under the previous government. So it's a hopeful sign again. But I would say wait and see what happens next. Because, yes, we saw some disappointments in the past. And reassessing the EU policies if they are maybe a bit positive. I would just like to draw your attention to one fact, that EULEX is no longer responsible for supporting this process. So this role, so even if we reassess the policies, it would not be a success of EULEX anymore, because now it's just the office of the EU in Pristina supporting the process of normalizations of relations between the two countries. So yes, if this deal is indeed a step forward and it's implemented, then we can definitely be proud and happy with the results. But then again, let's wait and see. And I think that you can see it in both ways. So if the initiative comes from one or two or more member states, but individually, you can see it as okay, the EU had a centralized process and it didn't work. Or you see, okay, this is Team Europe working together, so it's still our common success. So then again, the interpretation it's yours to make. So yes, so I'm positive, but let's see. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We will again continue the opposition with Professor Martin Fink.
Thank you. Dear candidate, I wanted to push you a bit more on the, I think, very important question of the generalizability of your work. Now, on the one hand, I think you are very modest, maybe too modest, and maybe underselling yourself by saying that you cannot make any generalizations based on the findings of your research. You say that at page 33 of your dissertation. On the other hand, at the same page in your methods chapter, the method section of your introduction chapter, you also say that the kind of case study that you apply is a theory-centered case study. Now, here I'm a little bit puzzled because as I understand, a theory-centered case study, theories, of course, are by definition general, right? They apply to a more general universe of cases. So if you use your case study to test hypotheses from theories, and you can say something about those theories on the basis of your case study, then it seems to me that there is always some kind of generalizability. So my question is, to what extent are the findings generalizable? And if they are to some extent generalizable, what is the universe of cases to which your results apply? Does it only apply to EU missions or maybe peace building missions more generally? Thank you.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your question, which relates, if I understood well, to the possibility to generalize my findings. And indeed, as I say, I would not be bold enough to say that the findings can be generalized because of a number of serious idiosyncratic factors in case of EULEX, and especially its mandate and its size. So the executive functions, which were unique for the EU in this particular mission, and also, well, it was the biggest mission, civilian mission ever deployed by EU. So I think these two factors mean that findings relating to Kosovo cannot be generalized so easily to other cases. Having said that, that does not mean that they cannot be useful for other researchers, because, and that relates also to your second question about the universe of cases where it could apply. So first of all, I would use a concentric method in order to define what kind of cases could be, for which kind of cases this particular case could be useful for research on which cases. So first of all, we have the Western Balkans. So we have the other countries, ex-Yugoslavia especially, where we have had other EU missions. We had them in Bosnia, in North Macedonia, and there are a lot of similarities in terms of culture, in terms of history. It was one country in the end. So also in terms of ethnical composition, so minority in one country is majority in another. So there is a lot that these countries have in common. So because of that, the findings related to EULEX, I think, are interesting for the academics who research the other countries of the region. So definitely there I see strong similarities, despite those idiosyncratic factors for EULEX. Now, another group of the countries that I think that this particular case would be still relevant are other European countries where the EU deploys or will deploy or has deployed missions. For example, I think here about Ukraine, Moldova, possibly Georgia. So for these countries share the European perspective with the Balkans. This is what I did not mention also for the Western Balkans. Obviously, they are all on the path to the European Union at different stages. But that is also the case for other European countries. And then again, there are cultural affinities because it's one continent, plus this European perspective, the same goals, the same expectations. So in a way, the conditions of deployment for EU missions there are somewhat similar to those in Kosovo. So that would also be relevant. And the third circle, where there would be the fewest similarities, but I would still see them existing, would be where the EU missions in other countries, so on the other continents, but also possibly the missions of the other international peace-building organizations. So I'm thinking here especially about UN, NATO possibly, or CE, because there what these organizations have in common is this idea of liberal peace that I described in my analyzed in my dissertation. So the way how things should be done, maybe now this way from liberal peace is evolving towards more active involvement of local actors and because of the criticism, but still the model is very much present in the models, in the ways of deployment of the missions of all those international organizations. So I think that what I uncovered in Kosovo might also be relevant in terms of local perceptions, because that was an important part of problems with EULEX, how some things did not work on the local level because EULEX was criticized. I think that might be relevant for other missions. And another aspect that you mentioned related to theory-centered case studies. So here I would...
Thank you. You can discuss over drinks. But now, Ewa Mahr, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and of your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. On the line, I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Hit the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you won the battle once you've grown. South side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
At least right. Really. So today, no, it's yes. He will not sit next to you if you have buttons.
That's interesting.
Dominic comes from work. No, it's just a phobia, and apparently it's like 1 in 76,000 people, so it's very common. I've never met anyone, but you probably don't talk.
Or people don't talk about it.
Yeah, exactly.
They just tend to avoid.
Yeah. So people will not talk to you directly. Okay, first thing they meet you and they say, I have a phobia. But so today when we went to this doctor because of the ear, I was sitting there with him and I was like, oh, can I ask you another question not related? So do you think he'll grow out of it or not? And he said, I don't know.
I read somewhere that it's just temporary, it's just a phase.
The doctor today said, okay, let's switch it on.
Yes, the person upstairs.
Is it a selfie? Julian, kochaj do przodu. Julian. Huh? He's totally unconscious. He might even sleep at night.
The mission has been enlarged in the meantime. I can see the audience. Ewa Mahr, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and of your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee here present has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor van Honecker is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university customs. I invite your supervisor to take the floor.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times? To be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Ewa Mahr, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university. Prorector, honorable members of the committee, colleagues, family and friends of Ewa. Dear Dr. Mahr, dear Ewa, first of all, my sincere congratulations with your new title and this major achievement, also on behalf of Petar Petrov, your co-promoter. Today is a real milestone, a moment to which you and all of us have been looking forward for quite some time. And luckily, this time, COVID did not spoil the party. A PhD is never a straightforward process, and also your trajectory has been one with hurdles, but also with successes and highlights. You can be proud of the result, as many of the members of the committee have already been saying. You managed to produce a rich piece of work, which is an important contribution to the literature on the long overlooked role of local actors in EU peace building. And you provide meaningful recommendations for policymakers in the area of crisis management. It all started several years ago, when you contacted and visited me in Maastricht to discuss your ambition to do a PhD at our university. And you also talked to Peter Petrov. Peter mentioned that you had a lunch or a coffee in the Perun, also to brainstorm about possible topics. And when it became clear that you wanted to work on EU crisis management in the Balkans, it was obvious that we and Peter would be a good team to support you. Over the years, we got to know each other very well, and especially in the last years, when both you and Peter had become young parents, we always took the time to also exchange some practical advices on how to deal with sleepless nights and teething babies. Many PhDs are struggling to find their research puzzle, but in your case, the puzzle was more or less thrown into your lap. We have heard that also during your presentation. So during one of your field trips, you got the inspiration for your PhD, your field trips to Kosovo for the European Parliament. And because you were wondering how to make sense of these anti-EULEX sentiments among the Kosovar population, despite the tremendous EU support in the establishment of their young state. Your research spoke very well to the local turn in the peace-building literature, and following some first work on your analytical frame, you soon went off to fieldwork in Kosovo. Building on some earlier contacts, you quickly built up an impressive network, and when there were practical issues such as language barriers, you always managed to find a solution. You started building a database, and you quickly learned how to work with Atlas TI. Your independent way of working, your positive energy and persistence made it a pleasure for Peter and me to guide you in your research process. Unlike the majority of the members of our graduate school, your PhD research was not your sole activity. After having taken leave from the European Parliament, you became a tutor at the economics faculty, and later on you also contributed, and Hilke already mentioned you also contributed to the Horizon EU CIFCAP project on improving the EU civilian capabilities for peace building. It was a project led by Anna Junkos of Bristol University, who was part of the committee but unfortunately could not be with us today. And together with Hilke and Peter, you produced a report comparing civilian planning and conduct capabilities in the EU, the UN and the OSCE, and later on this also led to a joint article in Global Affairs. But you were not only juggling with balls on the professional front. So you also on the home front, there were exciting developments. First came your dog, and that was very helpful, and because when you were stuck with ideas, you would walk the dog and then you would get some inspiration. But also more was happening. So there was a very impactful event, and there were 3 musketeers, and we see them sitting here, so welcome to them. And so 3 musketeers were entering your life, and that of Dominic. And first came Philip, and 13 months later, Julian and Luca followed lead. And when after some time you were faced with regular closures of the daycare due to the pandemic, Peter and I must say we were sometimes a little bit worried. We never doubted about your research capabilities, and because as time went by, we saw that you really grew as a researcher, and you developed strong academic skills. You also thought more and more critically and independently, and so that was not our concern, but we were really sometimes worried about the impact of the lack of sleep on your health and well-being. But you made it. And I think this is a tremendous achievement. And you made it because of your iron will, about your positive spirit and your hands-on approach, and that allowed you to go all the way and stand here today as Dr. Ewa Mahr. It sounds really nice, I think. And yeah, we are really very happy about this moment, and dear Eva, you should enjoy this beautiful moment. after all these years of hard work, and also enjoy the hours of extra sleep, if the boys are giving them these hours to you. And we hope that finally we'll have a little bit more time, both Peter and I, not just to think about the ultimate question of life, which you raise in the 9th proposition of your thesis, but also to enjoy your beautiful family. Congratulations once again.
Dear Dr. Mahr, as Sophie already said, sounds great, right? Dear Dr. Mahr, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I would like to congratulate you with the degree that you have acquired, and we will just drink to that in a moment. Before that, I still have some housekeeping issues. We will take a picture with Professor Fink, and then we will take a picture on the stairs, so Dominic, don't go away. And then we will drink and celebrate, so enjoy. Congratulations.
Can come forward here. So. Test. You can say something.